joined earlier by Tom Candia, who is a Numerary with Opus Dei. And for those of you that don't know, Opus Dei is a personal prelature of the Catholic Church established by Saint Jose Maria Escrivá almost 100 years ago. You can read more about Opus Dei, but Tom is a Numerary, which is someone who has chosen to remain celibate, but to be out in the world in ordinary professions, teacher, lawyer, train driver, office worker. And supernumerary would be those members of Opus Dei who are married and have children and families of their own. And they often refer to being in Opus Dei as the work, because Opus Dei means the work of God. And so Tom joins me to talk about his experience being a Numerary and why he became a Numerary at the age of 21. Hi, I'm here with Tom Candia, who is a 21-year-old Numerary with Opus Dei. And so I just want to chat with you today, Tom, about what brings a young man like yourself to this point in your life at 21, in the culture we live in 2022, to dedicate your life to make these decisions. And I know you because you went to the same school that my son's at now, and you do a lot of work with young people and help out with their formation and in clubs. And so we know each other a little bit from that. And so I thought it'd be really interesting just to hear your story. So welcome.
Perfect. Yes, thank you very much, Catherine. Well, I guess it started, you know, back when I was 14. And even, I guess, before then, when, you know, my parents were praying for me, and other people who knew me were praying for me. But personally speaking, the sort of journey started when I was 14. And I'd heard these ideas in a youth club run by Opus Dei, the youth club that I now help run. Now, when I was a boy, I was attending the club, and I was hearing these ideas, you know, about praying with God, speaking to God as if he were your friend. And these were ideas that I was like, you know, I was slowly getting used to. Anyway, so then I started praying every day, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. And sort of just like a conversation with God. Anyway, it got to a point where I was speaking, every week we're encouraged to chat to someone. And even in the club, in the youth club, we try to still do that now. And I was chatting with my spiritual director, the person I was chatting to. And he said, you know, maybe it's time for you to ask God what your vocation is, what he wants of you for the rest of your life. So I thought, great, okay, I'll start doing that. So then for 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, I was just asking God, repeating the question. I said, God, what do you want me to do? What's my vocation? What do you want me to do? Repeating that. And then about 3 months later, I had this great urge to become a priest. I thought God was calling me to become a priest. And then I spoke with my father and I said, I was like, look, Dad, I think God wants me to be a priest. And yeah, like, you know, at that time, I was also helping out in the parish with serving and so on. And then my dad sort of said, okay, great, why don't you pray about it for a bit longer? And then I told the person I chat to in the youth club, with one of the leaders there, and he said the same thing. He said, you know, keep on praying about it a bit longer, and then we take it from there. So anyway, the 3 months after that, I kept on praying, asking the same thing. God, what do you want me to do? What's my vocation? God, what do you want me to do? And then I thought, okay, maybe God's not calling me to become a priest. I think he's calling me to become a Numerary in Opus Dei. And just to give a bit of context, my parents are both in Opus Dei as supernumeraries, so married members of Opus Dei. And so I grew up very much with that culture at home. But then, so 6 months, then when I sort of revisited it with my father and my spiritual director, the person I chat to, I sort of had this sense that God was calling me to become a Numerary. And so at that point, they said, okay, they were sort of saying similar things, but they essentially said, look, great. What you need to do now is just one last push, pray about it for a bit longer. And at that point, I was sort of thinking, like, why have they done this? I've been praying for 6 months, and they said sort of carry on. I said, look, I don't mind, you know, I don't mind praying, and it's great, but why are they they're always repeating this idea of just pray about it a bit more? And only until very much later did I realize that it's essential, because it's very much in tie with, you know, God's not just going to give, you have to ask and you shall receive, and keep on knocking at the doors. So I think that's sort of the thing that they're trying to push then. But in the moment, I was sort of a bit, you know, not fed up, but, you know, I was a bit like, oh, I carry on praying. It's like, I'm pretty sure, guys. Anyway, so then a few weeks later, I spoke with the director of the youth club, and I said, yeah, I'm very sure I want to join Opus Dei. And he said, great. And so I wrote a letter to the head of Opus Dei, because that's the sort of the way that's done, and basically saying, look, I've been praying about this for a while. I've been coming to the youth club ever since I was 7 years old, and blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm really sure this is my vocation. And then I guess, so then I was part of the work then, the Opus Dei. And I mean, there's a lot's happened in the last 7 years, but I guess that's sort of the journey. It's a very simple one. But, you know, I wasn't like, I didn't convert from another religion. And then I was, you know, very simple. You know, I came from a family of members of Opus Dei, and I sort of grew up, you know, of course, another big thing is the formation that I was receiving at school, at the youth club, at home, was all very much, you know, they were pushing the same ideas. So then there wasn't a conflict of, oh, you know, but my teachers say this, but then they say this here, and my parents say something different. So it was all very much tied together, which I think that helped a lot as well.
Yeah.
But then, yeah,
It's all unified.
and I could speak about.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, no, it's all unified. Home, the family, the school, your club, and there's that consistent. Now it's interesting. You use the word push, and I'm going to pick up a little bit on a couple of things. One is if you can talk a little bit more about growing up in your family when you were younger, before this sense of vocation at 14. So what it's like growing up in a family with who are members of the work, who are supernumeraries, but also I know from getting to understand Opus Dei more, is that there's very much rooted in St. Josemaria's vision, this idea of freedom, isn't there? Very much, and that probably links back to what you was getting frustrated. Why aren't they just accepting that I know I want to be a numerary? Is because there's got to be, and I know that's a huge thing, but I think the perception out in the world is that Opus Dei, you know, want to try and get people to join, as if it's like sort of a recruitment drive. Yeah. I haven't sensed that at all. I haven't found that at all. And I think that that recognition of authentic freedom is huge. Like, that's a huge thing. So can you speak a bit more about those two things, maybe? So growing up in your family in terms of just prayer and how you lived, and then the freedom aspect.
I mean, so with the thing of growing up in a family of the work, I didn't really know I had no sense of what Opus Dei was, even when I started joining the club when I was 7, 8 years old. Maybe when I was sort of 10 years old, maybe someone mentioned, oh, supernumerary, and I was like, and then someone said, oh, your parents are supernumeraries, and I was like, oh, that's cool. What is that? So growing up, I didn't have a concrete, I didn't understand maybe like what Opus Dei was, or what a supernumerary or a numerary was. But as you sort of touched on the thing of freedom, it was very much a something at very much at the heart of the household. And I know different parents have different styles of raising their kids, and some are a bit more forceful, some are a bit more sort of allow for more freedom. But one thing that I sort of look back on now, which maybe I didn't appreciate when I was a kid, but was this aspect of freedom. The fact is that I think, I mean, I'm no wise man, but I think if you do push people a certain way, then it's just going to sort of backlash, like it's going to come back to bite. So it's like, okay, you know, it's great that people go to mass, it's great that people pray the rosary and pray in general, but if you're sort of pushing that, if you're forcing your child or forcing someone else to do it for the wrong reasons, then there's going to be a big backlash, especially in my opinion with something to do with the relationship with regards to relationship with God. Because just like any relationship, husband, wife, you know, two best friends, whatever, what's at it's a fulfilled relationship because they love each other, not because they're being forced. And, you know, you hear these things, arranged marriages and so on. But it's, you know, I think especially relationship with God, it's not something that can be forced. So freedom is very much at the heart of it. So yeah, I mean, freedom was obviously a big topic not big topic, but it was a theme that was consistent throughout my childhood. And then apart from that, I think that's like the main thing. And then obviously, I mean, I guess another thing was consistency with like the youth club. So I was receiving a lot of my formation there, and my dad always told me like consistency is key. Consistency is key. Yeah. And I remember one week I didn't attend the youth club because I was quite tired. And I remember we're 7 in total, 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls. And my 3 brothers were going to the youth club, and my dad was dropping them off at the station, and I could see out the driveway them drive away, and I just made the decision to stay at home because I was feeling tired and I didn't want to go to the youth club. 10 seconds later, I was like, oh man, I made a big decision. And then when my dad came back from the train station, he was like, what should we do? And I was like, inside there was a bit of pride there as well. I was like, no, you got to stand your ground. I mean, I probably should have said, oh yeah, can you give me a lift to the station? But anyway, I regretted that so much. So the idea was like, consistency, but my dad never forced me to go. And I think that's crucial now that I am sort of a bit more involved with the youth club. It's one thing that I see is I think kids or boys should only really come to the youth club if they really want to, in the sense of sometimes, and that's not to say like every week it's going to be complete freedom, because sometimes parents' plans and whatever, but on the whole, if the only reason why a boy attends is because the parents are forcing him, well, I don't think that's good, because then it goes back to the thing of freedom, which I guess I can speak about now. Like obviously, so within Opus Dei, freedom is at the core of everything, and there's stuff online which says different things and so on. But one thing, I've been in the work now for 6 years, and there's never been a single moment where I thought, oh man, I'm going to feel really, or feel pressured, or I don't have the freedom to do that. There are many wrong decisions that I've made even in my time during the work, whether it be not the worst things, but, I might go to a party and you think, okay, you shouldn't be doing that. But there was always that freedom. I remember speaking with my spiritual director and saying, oh yeah, well, I sort of want to do this, or even just very immature things like I want to dye my hair, which I ended up doing. And he said, well, Tom, there's one thing in Opus Dei, which is an idea sort of invented by Opus Dei, but it's this idea of consulting. So you consult with your spiritual director. So I sort of consulted with my spiritual director, like, should I dye my hair? And he said, so the main thing with consulting, very much in time with this idea of freedom, it's not, oh, you shouldn't dye your hair, or, don't do this. It's, look, my advice is, I wouldn't do it because vanity or, purity or whatever reasons that they can come up with, but it's very much advice. And then so the spiritual director says that, but then you yourself have to say, okay, this is his advice, or you have to pray about it and so on. And you think, okay, I'm going to make my own decision now. And I've never felt sort of pressured, or, my freedom hasn't been infringed in any way during these last 6 years. And even you hear stories of people like leaving the work, and it's like the fact that they're even able to do that must show some sort of freedom. I hear people speaking a lot about freedom, and or rather, when I've seen people speak about freedom like within Opus Dei, it's very, they make it seem as it's very rigid. And okay, yeah, there are certain rules, but that doesn't mean, if you want to leave the work, for example, you sort of just speak with your director, and he might say, pray about it, maybe there's other stuff going on, and you're just a bit sort of in the moment, so pray about it. But he's never going to say, oh no, don't do that. And I know this from personal experience. So no, freedom is very much at the heart of everything, and I guess the main ideas of the work are freedom, sanctification in ordinary life, and sort of bracket sanctification of work. So yeah, the aim is holiness, and we can only become holy if we're free, because if we're robots, then, like, if God just created 7 billion robots, then how can robots love if they're just programmed to do it? So freedom is actually very much at the heart of that.
It's not a real relationship. It's not a real relationship of love. It has to be consenting, and We know the price for that freedom is the suffering we experience and the evil in the world, but that's the necessary price, the necessary cost of a real relationship. As you say, then it's the same in marriage, in any relationship. I remember my son was, who you know, was it was the Euros final, and it was a holy day of obligation, and so he wanted to watch the England game. I think it was the semi-final, or was it the final? Did England get into the final? I can't remember. It was the one, was it last year? Yeah, so, and it was a big game, and we said, okay, but mass is at 6:30 and the game is at 7. And so we said to him, look, you want, oh, my camera's gone funny. We said, you want to watch the game and you want to go to mass. So you have to make a choice about what you want to do. And he thought about it, and he said, is there any way we can find a different church with mass at a different time? And so we found a 6:30 a.m. mass, and so we all went to that and then watched the game in the evening. But we handed that to him. We said, look, you if you really want to watch the game, you can miss mass. It's a holy day of obligation. We're not going to force you. And he had to think about it, and he himself said, you know, at a young age, I don't want to miss mass. He loves mass. So yeah, absolutely, that's really important, that element of just, you know, saying it's your relationship with God. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Sorry, that was it just froze for a bit.
I think it's a little bit jumpy today, the Zoom, for some reason. So that's and then sanctification you talked about as well. So Opus Dei, for anyone who doesn't know what it actually means, is the work of God. And we are Opus Dei, we are the work of God, and we do the work of God. So you might not be a member of Opus Dei, but we are. This is something St. Josemaria talks about again, is just that in anything you do, whether you don't have to be a priest or a monk or a nun, but in anything you do, if you're a teacher, if you're an airline pilot, if you're a train driver, if you work in a supermarket, it's doing that, everything you do, and recognizing that you are a work of God, and bringing that to everything you do. Is that right? Is that the right? Yeah.
Yes, it's spot on. This sort of, and the message, exactly. It's like we're apostles in the middle of the world. So, you know, even though monks who, you know, these Carthusian monks that they spend their whole life isolated, which is their vocation, and they're doing great work, and God wants them to be there. They're just as effective in God's overall plan than we are in the middle of the world. You know, as St. Josemaria says time and time again, like, our cell is the street. You know, they're in the mountains, sort of praying and mortifying themselves a lot, but we're sort of here. You know, we're in offices, we're in teaching positions, and so we can, and that's sort of our fish that God wants us to sort of be catching. And for the monks, even though they might not be physically in contact with people, they're catching their fish, metaphorically speaking, from far away. So this is another thing that sometimes whenever I speak to friends about this, they're sometimes it's a bit like, oh, because they may have heard some things, or they may have seen like the Da Vinci Code or whatever, and they say, oh, but how can a religious cult be normal, as it were, or how can they be sort of, you know, how are you a university student? Why aren't you sort of wearing like a hood and, you know, singing Gregorian chants in like the mountains? And it's just so, I guess the best way is people are sort of made aware, and this comes very much through personal apostolate, personal friendship. I was speaking with someone yesterday about this, and I was sort of giving him my theories for why you sometimes see these people in the middle of the street saying, you know, praise the Lord, go to mass, or with their sort of microphones, and it's like, look, what they're saying probably isn't wrong, but the reason why it doesn't work, in my opinion, is because that no one knows who they are. They haven't fostered a personal relationship, and the only real way that we can help others is through this personal apostolate, this personal relationship. So, you know, handing out leaflets or shouting in the street, you know, you might be saying good things, and it might help a few people. But I really think that the most effective way of helping others and helping them understand is through this personal relationship. And then,
that is so lovely. That's such a lovely way to express it, and so true, that you have to form relationships and build relationships, and you know, as Jesus said, whatever we do to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, these are fellow cells in the body of Christ. They're our brothers and sisters. So making those relationships, and then just sort of moving on to discuss other things from there. But so two things I want to ask you about as well. You mentioned being at university. So one is, you've said a little bit there, but how is it, what's a typical day like? What's your university experience like? And to what extent does your being a Numerary in Opus Dei impede your, you know, university experience, or do people treat you differently? I know you've spoken a little bit about that, and the other is just also, when you've spoken about that, is what did you ever question faith in God himself? Was there ever, because I'm a teacher of teenagers, and I know that it's very common, and it's to sort of say, well, actually you're telling us about God, but how do you even know God exists, and have that crisis of faith? So shall we start with let's start with university life. How's that day to day?
So it's interesting, the word you used was impede, and I tell the boys this a lot, and whenever I'm speaking to my friends about this, I also explain it to them like this. And so, for example, you might say, one might say, oh, but like you're a Catholic, or you're a Numerary, so you can't go out partying, you can't go out clubbing, you can't drink, or whatever. So first of all, well, that's one thing which I'm going to get back to later. But then, well, in fact, I'll address that now. So the fact is that it's going back to the thing of freedom. So it's not that we can't do this, or, you know, we can't have a relationship, or we can't drink, or whatever. It's just the fact that I have freely chosen to do that. There are many stories of this, of I forgot the name of the priest, but he sort of, sometimes he goes quite far to make the point. He's like, look, I can do whatever I want because I have freedom. But he sort of goes on to explain that's not what freedom is. Freedom isn't just do whatever you want whenever you want. And that sort of ties nicely in with the next idea, which is, I'm not saying no to something, I'm saying yes to something much greater. So this is very much, I guess this is sort of like, I guess you can sort of call it like short-term pleasure, long-term happiness. It's you know, just, I'm not saying no to this partying, I'm saying yes to God's will, which is I guess that's sort of the meaning of that. That's what the vocation is. It's saying yes to God's will. So if you're going to say yes at the beginning when I'm 14, then and another idea that I like is Maya Angelou. She says courage or fortitude is important. It is the most important virtue, because without courage you can't practice the other virtues consistently. And the key word here is consistently, because you can say yes to God once, or you can be charitable once, but it's heroic, it's saintly to do it all the time. So if you said yes to God once when you're 14, you know, you're very enthusiastic, you're praying, you know, not so many you don't have lots of responsibilities, that's great. Just in the same way that it's good to be charitable once, but what makes it holy, what makes it saintly and heroic, is to be able to say yes to God in everything. And that can be even just, for example, so like I'm saying yes to God's will through not partying, or doing certain mortification, or so. I think it's sort of that idea of, you know, if we're doing it consistently throughout the rest of our lives, then that's how we become holy.
Like Our Lady, it's like Our Lady being the perfect disciple. That questioning at the Annunciation, and then the yes to God, and then that being consistent throughout her life, right to the cross. And to imagine that saying yes to that, you know, your own son on the cross. So it's that, and that's absolutely courage. So go on, sorry.
And then on a more sort of like day-to-day basis in university, like I make it very clear, but not in like a very shouty way. I won't be like, oh, hi, my name's Tom, I'm a Catholic. But people sort of start asking questions. Like I might say something that might make them think, and they're like, oh, like, why do you think this? Or why do you look at it like that? And I say, oh, well, I'll never say, oh, because I'm a Catholic, because I don't think that's a good enough excuse, as it were, in the sense, okay, if for example the topic of abortion comes up, or contraceptives, then it's like, okay, I'll keep it secular in the sense of, ultimately, I mean, it's a human life. But I try to keep it secular. But I think people always notice like, oh, he thinks a bit differently, or he is a bit different, not in like a weird way, but in like a, I know, curious, or I don't know what the word is, but then they start asking questions, and this has happened many times. People say, oh, like they'll say, why do you think this? And when they say, why do you think this? It's not like, oh, let's have a further discussion about this. It's more like, what's behind all of that? Now, I guess you can sort of say, yes, because I'm a Catholic, but I don't. If I just say that to everything, then we're not going to get anywhere in terms of like discussion. But yeah, just I wanted to mention something before as well with this thing of like personal relationships. I think we live in like a society where a lot of the world has been carved up into pros and antis, and this versus this, and debates, and I think I attended a workshop about debates, and the guy said the three things that you need in order to have a debate are charity, clarity, and sincerity. And he started with charity, and I mean, he went on to speak about something else, but what I took from it was, okay, behind that view, behind that political view, behind that whatever, his idea is a soul. And as you said, we're all children of Christ. So it's having this, even though at uni sometimes things might get heated, it's like, okay, there's a soul behind that view, there's a human person behind it, and I have to respect them. Charity is the essence of Christianity. So that's another thing that's helped me at university, or I've been sort of practicing at university as well, to try and keep this, finding common ground rather than just being like, oh, I won the argument. What's that phrase of, you might win the argument, but you've lost the soul or lost the person. So it's not about winning arguments, it's about winning souls. So that's like university. I mean, the fact is that people are great, like no one's perfect, but they're like, we're mice in cheese, as it were. Like there's just so much good around us, and there's so much potential that can be done. So we sort of just have to use the opportunity. University is a great one because it's not like school, because you don't have the rules, and you sort of, especially as like a student, you're a bit more independent, and you're living, cooking, whatever. I think that sort of atmosphere just allows for a lot more discussion. University students are not the most mature people, but we can have a discussion when the time calls for it. And so university life is great. And there's another thing, obviously, very much at the
no, go carry on, please, Tom.
Another thing very much at the heart of the work is Opus Dei is sanctification of work. And so one thing that I don't try to give across, but I do. So for example, like with me now, I keep a crucifix in front of me when I'm studying, and I pull out the crucifix in university, just in front of my laptop, right here. And I get people asking me, it's like, oh, why do you have a cross? So I mean, they know it's a cross, and they know I'm a Christian, but they say, why do you put it there? Isn't it a bit sort of showy offy? And I say, look, I don't want to, impose anything on you. I don't want to feel like you're being, if it's making you feel uncomfortable, I can like put it on the other side or wherever, I'll put it here. But I try to explain to them as much as I can this idea of presence of God, keeping God present throughout the day. And for me, the way I look at it is, God is our creator, God is our father, and he loves us dearly. He's given everything for us. So, attending mass, once a week, even once a day, maybe saying the rosary, doing 15 minutes of prayer, you might use an hour in the day, maybe 2 hours. And then it's like, well, if you really think about it, I mean, we should probably be giving 24 hours of our day for God, because he's like given up everything. But then you think, oh, but I don't have time. I've got a job. I've got this. And I think presence of God is the best way that we can keep God at the center of our day. 24 hours a day. That's how we sort of keep an open conversation with him. So, having reminders like a crucifix, a picture of Our Lady, which there's one behind me, just using those moments where or if in school you have an oratory, or near your office there's a church, or those, if you can find these different ways to sort of find an excuse to go into the chapel, or say an aspiration, you know, even just something as simple as like, Lord, I love you, or Lord, into your hands I commend my spirit, or something very simple to keep God at the center of the day. Because ultimately, look, we're working, but what for? You know, ultimately we're trying to get to heaven. So keeping God at the center of the day. And I get these questions about in university about the crucifix, and I don't explain it to them like that. But I say, look, ultimately, I'll say to them, they'll say, why do you have a cross? And I say, oh, because I love God. And they say, oh, but that I can love God without having a cross. And I said, yes, I love God, but I want to keep him at the center of the day. And then I use the analogy of a soldier who takes a photo of his wife or kids into war with a picture in his pocket. And it's like, well, why does he keep that? It's because he doesn't want to forget them. He wants to remember them all the time, and he wants to keep an image there. And I guess that's the best way I can sort of explain it. And I sort of say, I don't want to ever forget that Jesus is there. So I have my crucifix there, or card of Our Lady. And that's how so people in, you know, generally speak, I mean, to be honest, I don't know what people think. Maybe they think I'm a complete weirdo, but or maybe they just think, oh, look, this guy is sort of taking his faith seriously. But one thing that I do know, and I've experienced this from secondary school, is that people will associate you with sort of, you know, being Catholic or being sort of quite solid in this regard. And even I've started to, you know, I get messages from some of the friends who weren't practicing or who weren't believers in the first place, and they're going through a rough time in life, or, you know, things going on with their family or financially, and then you see that you're the first person that they turn to, and it's like, you know, even we may have been good friends, we may have not been great friends, but they just remember those things. And I'm sure the same is going to happen with university. So it's, as I said, we're mice and cheese in university. You know, people's brains are sort of gone crazy. Like, you're thinking all the time, and I think university is a great opportunity to do a lot of good, a lot of apostolate. So yeah.
What I was going to say is how actually deeply attractive that authenticity is, in the sense that I think, like you've already just said, people are attracted to that. They're thirsty for meaning. They don't know it, but they're hungry and thirsty for a relationship with God. And so when they see that in someone, you say, oh, maybe they think I'm a weirdo. It's highly likely that they probably see something that they can't grasp and want some of it. That's my sense in teaching young people. And when I see young people like yourself who are on fire for Christ, they gather people around them somehow. And not everyone agrees with them, but there is, just living that authentic life is so powerful. And like you say, you don't always have to go straight in with, you know, a badge. Hi, I'm Tom, the Opus Dei Numerary Catholic. Ask me about it, like I'm doing. But just living that, and then being available to just answer honestly if people do want to search deeper. Brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. Like, another thing is that people are, as you said, they're intrigued. But I think one thing that's like, another thing that in society we're sort of lacking is just God in general. Before, everything was sort of centered around God, but when you take God away and you start replacing these other sort of idols and earthly things, then your life becomes, it's like, well, what do I do? And then people get to such a point where they're just like, man, what do I do? And then, you know, they resort to, I know, they might speak to a priest and convert, or more naturally they'll turn to someone who they have who was their friend previously, or who they get along with well. So I think it's becoming more and more sort of prevalent in today's society, the fact that, you know, God is less present in people's lives, and they're sort of replacing it with other earthly things. So it's a great opportunity for us Catholics to really be there for people. And going back to another thing that you sort of spoke about before, this idea of like recruiting or proselytism within the work, it's sort of like, obviously, this isn't an army, and it's not like, we have to, you know, fill the ranks. And it's because ultimately, this is another thing that I've learned as a youth club leader, is that I don't do the forming, God does. So I don't do the converting, God does. So it's like, if God doesn't want any vocations in Opus Dei, which I highly doubt, because, you know, he's wanted vocations throughout the last 95 years. But if God didn't want any vocations, then he won't give any vocations. We're seeing this in Opus Dei in the different regions. We have Scotland. Only recently has someone sort of joined Opus Dei, but before that, it was 30 years before someone in Scotland had joined Opus Dei. Kazakhstan, Sweden, but there are places where people haven't whistled, as we call it, haven't joined Opus Dei for decades, and you think, but that's just part of God's plan. And the people in those countries, you know, the numeraries and the supernumeraries I very much look up to. They're very heroic, because even though they may not be seeing fruits, they're just constantly at it, just consistently, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
And you know, you see, this is so. Yeah, that's sort of the idea, is that God forms, we don't. So, you know, ultimately, this idea of proselytism and recruiting is sort of like, well, I'm not the one recruiting, so
Yeah.
I don't really choose, as it were. Now, sometimes you might think, well, what if you pressure kids into doing this? Now, I know that in the work we don't do that, because precisely for this reason of freedom.
Yeah.
We don't want. It just goes against everything that we stand by, and everything that God wants. So, or doesn't want, rather. So, you know, everything goes back to freedom ultimately, and proselytism, I think, is a word that has like sort of negative connotations nowadays.
Yeah.
So I guess we don't tend to use it as much. I guess the word now is like apostolate, or being apostles. So yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. I want to ask you about confession, Tom, because I think you've talked about going to the mass and praying, but also I know that confession's really important, really powerful, and actually there's no need at this point to say Opus Dei and Catholicism, because it's all one. You know, we're Catholics, we're fellow Catholics, maybe called in different vocations, and with different gifts. But so in our faith, then, just generally in our faith in Catholicism, I found confession to be life-changing, transformational, necessary, beautiful, but I'm older than you, and I didn't when I was 21. I didn't go for a long time. So how do you find it, and what's your experience of it?
Yeah. Well, just one quick thing, but you mentioned the thing of Opus Dei's Catholic. Many things, for example, there are many things in Opus Dei. Everything in Opus Dei is like, even the prayers that we do, the traditions, the customs that we hold, are all Catholic traditions. Yeah. So I know there are things online where it's sort of like, you know, they do these things, but we haven't invented anything.
Yeah,
you know? Exactly. So I think that's like a very crucial point as well, you know, with stuff to do with mortifications, and people think, oh, you know, this new radical, it is not new or radical, because the church has been doing this for thousands of years. But anyway, so I just wanted to add on to that point. But then I think of the confession. So in the work, we're encouraged to go once a week, and if for example you commit a mortal sin, then go as soon as you can find a priest, as it were. But no, confession is of course essential. There's a book called Frequent Confession, or Frequent Confession, depending on how you read it, and you know, it's just to highlight the point that confession is one of those things, is this sacrament norms that is essential, because as many Catholics know, it's the period in which, okay, yeah, we've fallen down, but this is how we get back up. And obviously Christ teaches us, you know, the first to cast a stone should be the one without sin. It's, you know, it's like, well, Christ is forgiving our sins, and so I should not forgive other people's sins, but we should be merciful, we should be charitable. So I think it's very good for our humility. Sometimes we can be like, oh, that guy, well, what was he doing? And you think, well, you know, in confession, like maybe Jesus thinks of us like that. Or maybe the analogy that I sometimes think of is if a dad says, you know, a boy's been in trouble, and the teacher goes to the parent and says, you know, little Johnny was he did something bad at school today, and the dad's, oh, sorry about that, okay, cool, and goes to little Johnny and says, you know, Johnny, I really hope you didn't do that again. Or maybe not like that, but he says, look, Johnny, I know that you did this thing. Let's try and not do it. You know, just take a chill pill. Just try not to do it again tomorrow at school. And the son's like, yeah, I'm really sorry. I promise you, I'm not going to do it again. I promise. Next day, same thing happens. Parent gets a phone call, and then the parent says the same thing. Okay, Johnny, tomorrow, let's try and not do it again. And then Johnny's like, no, I promise. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And then if that just happens every week, from a human point of view, the dad would just be like, after the second month, you think, I've tried I've tried eight times, and this boy's never learning. And that's Christ with us all the time. So, I mean, obviously, our Lord and God has ultimate patience. But, you know, I think it's very good for our humility. Confession is a great lesson for us to sort of say, yeah, like we are the last person to be judging that person, or you know, throwing the stone. So yeah, I mean, in itself, confession is beautiful, because we can keep that connection open with God, and whenever we sin, we sort of break that connection. But then also the lesson, well, for me anyway, the lessons that you can take from confession and sort of say, well, yeah, I'm going to apply this to the people I live with, or my family, or my siblings. Then they're not the most perfect person, but neither am I. So yeah
it's this idea that the church is like a hospital for the sick. It's because some people sometimes think you must think you're so holy and so good, but it's not. It's recognizing that we're exactly not that. We're trying to be, but we need help. We need God's grace in our lives. And yeah, like you say, we can't judge others. And God is infinitely merciful. I think the story of the lost son is the story of confession, isn't it? It's you fall on your knees. It doesn't matter if you do it this week, next week, you fall on your knees and you return to the Father, and he welcomes you with open arms. And he's infinitely merciful. And the only thing that keeps us from God is our own will and our own desire not to be close to God, because he doesn't want to ever get rid of us, ever let go. But the sacraments help us in that, to stay close to God and prayer and a prayerful life. So you're what? So that's brilliant, Tom. Just then to finish, you're one of 7, did you say?
One of 7, correct.
7. And you fall where? Eldest, youngest?
I'm the 5th child. I'm the youngest. 5th child. I'm the youngest boy.
Youngest boy. Okay, yeah.
So yeah, so it's boy, girl, boy, girl. So I've got 2 little sisters.
Oh.
But yeah, being the youngest boy has many advantages. Apart from having many hand-me-down clothes, I learned a lot from my brothers. I'm very grateful for them. You sort of see the mistakes that they make, and you try not to make them.
Let them do it all wrong first.
Exactly.
It's all right for you. No wonder you're so wise. At your age. Oh, brilliant. And what are your plans then? You're studying what? Business, is it, at uni?
I'm studying business. Business at university. My plans, to be honest, I'm not sure. I guess I was reading this book about business ethics, economic thinking for the theologically minded. Anyway, he speaks about, it's basically business ethics. And he speaks about the role of a Christian in business. So it's quite an interesting book. But you sort of think, okay, I'm just going to try and help. Essentially, I mean, the idea is let's help people as much as we can. So, you know, even though you can gain wealth for yourself, you shouldn't just gain wealth for the sake of gaining wealth. And if you do gain wealth, then you should sort of not necessarily give it to others, but you can, you know, maybe hire someone that's less advantaged than you, or, you know, the one thing that as a Numerary in Opus Dei, for those who may not know, I'm not going to get married, so it's apostolic celibacy. So I'm not going to have kids, but my siblings will, and they'll have, you know, they'll have kids, and their kids will have grandkids. So I'll have nieces and nephews. And one thing that I've been praying about a lot recently is the idea of sort of preparing the way for the future generations of my family, for my nieces and nephews, and, you know, helping them as much as humanly speaking as possible, so that they can focus on the spiritual side. Because I want to start, or at least I've tried to start a real estate business. So I want to buy properties, and, you know, if in 25 years when my siblings' kids, or 30 years when my siblings' kids have left university and they're ready to buy a house, I can say to them, look, here's a house, and you don't have to worry about that. You know, you don't have to worry about getting a job. You know, you can sort of, you know, you have the house and you're sort of here, you're on your own from here. But it also just takes off that massive pressure. And I'm very keen on you know, helping my, I guess, his family, friends, and then others, I guess. So that's sort of the plan, as it were, the very broad plan. But you never know, God might come out of nowhere and just be like, nope, boom. You
never know.
And
see where God takes you.
Exactly. I might end up in a seminary in I don't know, North Africa. I don't know. It could be anywhere. I mean, I don't think so, but I hope not. But let's see. Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of the broad plan.
Oh, that's lovely. That's good. Good. Well, thank you so much, Tom. Is there anything else you feel you've got a platform that I haven't asked you about, or that you feel like actually people misunderstand this, or I wouldn't mind setting the record straight on this while we have a chance?
I mean, there are so many things I can speak about the work, about Opus Dei, but one thing, maybe just to finish off, the houses of Opus Dei, also known as the centres, are places where the Numeraries live. So in Kelston, which is the centre that I live in, where we are 9 Numeraries, so 2 Numerary priests and then 7 laymen Numeraries. And I must say, the thing that's very different from a normal household, as it were, sort of growing up, is the family atmosphere, in the sense of, so for example, we have these things called, well, it's not a new idea, but get-togethers. So every day after at 9 o'clock, we sit down for half an hour and just chat just about anything, the news, things that we've done today.
Yeah.
And so the get-togethers actually contribute to the family life, the meal times. It's very much a social activity, and you're chatting with people and so on. But the thing that brings the family life together is what we call the plan of life. For example, doing the prayer together. So we're there in the oratory together in the morning, praying together, doing our own personal prayer with each other.
Yeah.
Attending the mass together, saying the rosary together, and that just is. I don't know if I'm sort of if I can do it justice, but it's the family life in a centre is amazing, and that's not to say. So when I was growing up with my family, it's sort of like, obviously, I mean, I love my family and it was great, but there's something a bit different in a centre, because I don't know how to explain it, but the one thing, and now that I've sort of appreciated this more, whenever I was living in Spain for a year, and sometimes even when you travel, you might go to Rome and you sort of message the director of the centre that you're going to. So for example, if I'm going to Rome for one night, and I'll text the director, I'll ask someone who knows him, and I'll say, "Oh, hi, Giovanni, can I stay in the centre for one night?" When I go to that centre, I just feel so welcome, so at home. And that's one thing that just, that is one thing that has always sort of stood out for me, even as a boy. When I came to the youth club, there's always something a bit different, very, very fulfilling, different. And yeah, I guess I'll finish on that note. I mean, there are so many other things that I could speak about, but
yeah, we can chat again. We can
if
again. Anytime, if you go off and you reflect and you think, I really want to share this aspect of my life or of the experience I have, then we'll have another conversation. But there's definitely my experience. I'm not a member of Opus Dei, but very good friends with lots of members of Opus Dei, and my experiences and meeting you as well is just, there is this authentic joy, this sort of this love of Christ at the center of everything, and this openness. And I think it is kind of, it's so refreshing and lovely to see in a young person like yourself, an ordinary young person like yourself who kicks the ball around with the lads and goes to uni and has plans to do your business, but just to have Christ at the center of your life, it's really something. It really is. And it's so nice that you've come on and just had a chat about that and shown people that it's nothing to be afraid of, that it's nothing that, don't believe the hype. It's a lot of the stuff you hear.
Yeah.
It's just like anything. You've got to get to know someone. You can hear things, but it's about that personal relationship. Go and meet people and get to know them and see the joy of how they live and the authenticity.
Yeah. Exactly. If I could add one more thing, it's sort of like a bit of, not promotion, but it's this. So the chaplain of the Cedar School and the chaplain of the priest of Kelston of the centre, Fr George, he wrote a book a few years ago called Going on Vocation. Now it's for young people, but every year I read it well, I read it once a year because that is very youthful in the sense of it's very, very simply put, and that book sort of just shows all these ideas that you've been mentioning. Is love for Christ, prayer, and how to sort of, there's many chapters, but they're sort of 5-10 minute reads, and there's a chunk of the gospel which he uses, and then he comments on it and uses that to make sort of the point, whether it be about prayer, or like, for example, I was just reading the chapter on Simon of Cyrene, how he just had an unexpected encounter with the cross. And sometimes that happens with us throughout the day. It's sort of like, oh, God is calling us to, even just the smallest thing. It's like, oh, we hear a voice saying, oh, offer up that coffee. And you think, oh, no, I wasn't expecting it, but God wants us to say yes then. Or it could be bigger things like, okay, God wants us to not take up the cross, but take up our vocation. So if I could suggest any book, as it were, Going on Vocation is such an excellent book. It really is. It puts everything into perspective, very simply put, and very simple ideas. And if you're sort of thinking on where do I start, maybe that could be the way forward if anyone is thinking about those things. But yeah, that's pretty much it from my side.
Going on Vocation is the book.
Going on Vocation. I think it's on Amazon. I think by Fr George Boronat. That's Boronat. Boronat.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. Anyway, it's excellent.
Yeah,
so,
brilliant. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Catherine.
My fellow Catholics, I think the Opus Dei formation is brilliant. It's really good, and in the culture where sometimes we're having problems in Catholic schools and the formation isn't there, and it hasn't always been there in our parishes, for sure I can speak to that. It's just fantastic. It's really good, really supportive for families, Catholic families trying to raise their children in this culture and maintaining a love of Christ and trying to be holy in their everyday lives. Tom, thanks so much. It's so lovely to hear from you, and
thank you very much, Catherine.
And hopefully we'll catch up again, and I guess I'll be seeing you Saturday.
Yes. Exactly. There you go. Perfect.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, Catherine.